Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another inner hour tonight. Hope you're well. Hope you had a good weekend. Nice to see you all. So, um, the first thing before I forget, because I tend to forget announcements, I get caught up in whatever else we're talking about. Um, the this is this is the season of graduations for us. We have some grandchildren graduating. So I will not be doing an inner hour again next week. We're skipping one more week for yet another event. And then after that, we'll start up this series or continue the series again and keep going. But nothing next week. And we'll send out a reminder. Hopefully, my lovely wife has a note of that somewhere in the office. But we'll send out a reminder that next Sunday, exactly a week from now, we will not be doing an hour, and then we'll start up again the following Sunday. So I appreciate you kind of keeping track of all this. And we do send out notices. So if you check your email and aren't sure, what's going on because of our crazy schedule, you can keep up to date on that. But then after all the graduations, things will kind of settle back into what we pretend is normal around here. So, all right. Well, we're continuing in our Great Souls series. And I realized last week, not when we were talking, but just looking over all my notes, um, I have so many that I would love to do, and we could probably do the rest of the year on that. And some of you might like that, maybe, but I'm sure there are others that would get pretty tired of it and want to move on to something else. So I'm skipping a few big ones and paring down that are really well known. Like for example, I've been mostly doing chronologically. And so I'll kind of explain what I'm skipping ahead to tonight. But just to take a moment, as I always do, I want to make the announcement before I forgot. I'm going to just pause, light my candle, take a quiet moment, invite you to do that if you haven't had time to do that yet today. Share cushions. All righty. So there are some, like, let's say for in the time period we're skipping, a number of people were in that we're not going to do because, again, they're really pretty well known. Like King David, for example, from the Bible, who was around 1000 BC, we think. His son Solomon after that, and the whole construct of the Jewish temple, the permanent Jewish temple, huge influence on Judaism and subsequently Christianity and Islam as well, of course, and the site they picked in Jerusalem, why that site was holy, why they did it there. There's so much about all that. You could do a whole just study series on just on the temple, for example, which I would find fascinating. If that sounds fascinating to anybody else, email me and let me know. But it's a lot and it's readily available. There's just so much stuff out there and all that that you probably either know or already decided you don't care to. So I'm skipping over that. And then again, in the Hebrew Bible time period after that, the period of the prophets, there were many major ones of those, like Isaiah and Zechariah and so on. And we're kind of skipping through those. Many of the Christian concepts that later got applied to Jesus are found in the prophets, particularly Isaiah and Zechariah. Zechariah speaks of two messiahs, as did the Essenes, which if you've been with me through that series. Isaiah spoke a lot about Yeshua in the New Testament, quotes Isaiah quite a bit. I would say more than anything else from the Tanakh. I'm not sure that's technically correct, but he quotes him a lot. And so that which and then Daniel, who has the whole Son of Man, the phrase Son of Man. There are two phrases, Son of Man, in the Bible, both of which are Hebrew phrases, Ben Adam, or Aramaic Bar Adam. And they mean very different things. So, what did Jesus mean when he used that? That's another whole study in itself. But he was called the Son of Man in the New Testament. He actually was not called the Son of God in the New Testament, although I know there are places that people now quote that way. But but the Son of Man is simply a Hebrew way or Semitic way of saying person, a human being. So mostly when it's used in the Torah, in the prophets, in the New Testament, it means that. It means a person, a human being. But sometimes it refers to Daniel's prophecy. And Daniel's prophecy was about a messianic figure that he referred to as the Son of Man, who is resplendent and uh, divine in appearance, brighter than the sun, and it's in Daniel 7 if you want to look into that on your own. I'm not doing that, but that's another very influential piece, particularly within the faith framework of Judaism and Christianity, and then to a lesser extent, Islam as well. So we're skipping some significant things, but and then also during the late 500 BC era, you have a number of very influential Eastern figures, Gautama, the Buddha, uh, uh, um, the one we call Confucius in English, Kongzi, and who else was then? Sun Tzu, for those of you who are into the art of war, one of the most famous military treatises ever written called The Art of War by Sun Tzu, who is a Chinese emperor and general, and um, really phenomenal strategy book. Not just for military campaigns, actually, but just adversarial settings in general. But that he was during that same era. Um, During that same time period, Babylon, the great empire of Babylon, fell to Persia, which became a great empire. Lots of stuff happened during the time period. I'm skipping, so my apologies to that. One of my favorites that I'm also skipping, it's just one of my personal favorites, is The Legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the Quest for the Holy Grail, which ties in again with mystical Christianity and mystical Judaism. And the Grail study to me is fascinating. I'm If that would be again a topic of interest, please email me because I would love to do a series just on the Grail sometime. Really interesting stuff from the literal understanding of it being a cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper to meaning a bloodline of Jesus's ancestry. Um, but anyway, lots of cool stuff I'm skipping. So sorry about that. If any of that sounds interesting, look it up. It's out there. So tonight, I'm actually going to talk about the people that started classical philosophy in the West, so-called classical. It's Greek philosophy, and it started with Socrates, which was popularized actually, we only know about him through Plato because Socrates left no written works that we've ever found. So Plato is really the one. And how much of Plato is really Plato saying this is Platonic teaching? And how much of it was Socrates? Was really all of it Socrates, which is kind of the way Plato presents it, that he's just quoting all these dialogues and things he learned from Socrates, which is certainly possible. He was a student of his, and Aristotle was a student of Plato's, and so on down the line. Or was part of it a literary device of Plato just bringing out his own teachings and his own wisdom under the mantle of Socrates, whom he had great respect for, where maybe he instigated some understanding in Plato, but Plato took things much further. So whatever the case, those two were the kingpins that kind of launched what became the Greek philosophers, which became the foundation of Western classical philosophy. So I want to tell you a little bit about Socrates and Plato tonight. And if at any point you have a question, let me know. And I will have pause also just to make sure you have time to share things if you haven't spoken up yet. So Socrates lived approximately 469 to approximately 399 BC or BCE, depending on the dating system you like to use. BC meaning before Christ, BCE meaning before Common Era, but the dividing line is exactly the same. So this is a kind of a quick summation of Socrates, who did lots of teaching face to face in person and left nothing written that we've ever found. I'm going to give you just a few key points that he's very, very well known for, that he was quoted a lot. He came up with the phrase "know thyself." And a little later, when the mystery schools of Greece developed, and mystery schools elsewhere too, Thessalonia and different places, even Egypt, although they weren't called that, there were initiatory schools in Egypt, but there were mystery schools along the same line. Over most of them, including the one at Delphi, for example, at the entry to the temple, it's carved over the threshold, "Know thyself," in Greek, of course, which was Socrates. And the idea that self-awareness is the quintessential essence of all philosophy. That's the core of it, is self-awareness. The other thing is that Socrates taught primarily, or was known for teaching primarily, not like in a lecture format, not in a presentation format, but in a questioning format. He would ask people questions. So if he were to exist today and entering a debate on something like a hot topic, I don't know what would be a hot topic, abortion, gun control, war, whatever would be a hot topic for people. Instead of saying, well, you're wrong and I'm right, or presenting his position and defending it, what he would do is question yours. Oh, so why is it that you think gun control works? Oh, well, what is it that you think this would help if it were in place the way you think it should be in place? Well, what reasons do you have for believing that it would actually work that way if you passed that legislation? Have you ever done things like that before? And if so, what was the result? I mean, he would ask questions of the other person's position on any given issue. I'm just picking kind of a hot button topic because philosophical understanding back then was a hot button topic. So, and one of the things he's famous for when he was accused by some of the rulers of Athens before and during his trial of perverting the youth of Athens with what he taught. What he said was, but I don't, and it's like, well, what is it you really know? What are you teaching? And he said, what I know is what I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just inquiring. I don't know. And so the idea of I know nothing or I know that I know nothing is kind of quintessential Socratic as well. He believed that knowledge was a virtue and that ignorance was the root of almost all of our problems, that he had a great deal of focus, practical focus on how one should live, on the right way or good way to live, what we would now probably call ethics. He called it that too, by the way, but the idea of ethics in everyday life, a moral code, standards, not only personal standards, but cultural standards, were essential for civilization to endure. And if you've done many studies of ancient civilizations that were once great and fell, you can see a lot of evidence, I think, to justify that position. Another quote that he's famous for is, "An unexamined life is not worth living." So the idea of looking at what you do and why you do what you do, and what is your motivation, and what is your understanding, and what do you secretly hope to get out of what you're doing, those kind of things were important to him, and he encouraged them in people. While he had a different understanding of the word soul, psyche in Greek, than you and I might today, probably different. He stressed that the care of the soul was far more important than the care of the body, and believed that the soul endured, was immortal, and that the body wasn't. It was corruptible and corrupt and mortal and limited and would pass away. As I was talking about,
Hey,
yeah,
Stephen.
yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry to interrupt. Hey, I completely didn't understand when you talked about the collapse of civilizations. I didn't
Ah,
get what your point. I did not understand your point there.
sure, sure, sure.
Thank you.
Um, Civilizations in general, this is a broad generalization, of course, but some of the civilizations we consider great, like the Greek civilization in its golden age, Rome in its certain height of its civilization, certain Chinese civilizations. were built on moral principles that were integrated into the fabric of their society. And when those moral principles began to decay and decline, their civilization fell apart. So there's a lot of that that's repeated historically, both in Western and Eastern cultures, when there was adherence to a very strong standard of ethical behavior, society in general, not that there weren't issues, but in general, civilized society, which wasn't all violence and corruption, and not that there was none of that, but as across the board was generally a safe, enduring social structure. Um, when the code, the moral codes or the ethical codes upon which those were built began to disintegrate, it, it was the civilization itself began to fall apart and eventually did fall apart. So
Thank you.
the
That makes more sense. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's thank you for clarifying. Um, so in that light, Socrates had tremendous respect for law and social order and social justice as well. He could have, for example, once he was sentenced to death, he could have escaped. There was a plan to get him out of Athens and save him, and he wouldn't do it because he'd been convicted in their courts, and he had a very strong respect for the justice system of Greece and the idea of social responsibility and social order. The type of reasoning that Socrates used, which is very involved when you get into the logic of it, and I'm not going to do that tonight, but it's called dialectical. And without getting into the logical arguments and fallacies and how deductive reasoning works and all of that, which again is pretty easy to study if you want, if you don't know about it. He used that extensively. And a lot of his so-called proofs, he had four major proofs for the immortality of the soul. Um, most of his proof of anything was reasoning, deductive reasoning. And but the essential thing in light of how it kind of you can kind of see today how it would be beneficial is that he taught that philosophy, again, a Pythagorean word, love of wisdom, was was a collective quest for the truth, and that nobody had it, that everybody was searching for it. And so the way we found it is to engage in debate and discussion. And the idea that I think something about the nature of life that you don't, or you believe something about the nature of life that I think is wrong, instead of me being upset with you or vice versa about not believing the way I do, that you don't have the truth and neither do I. The truth is discovered when we engage in debate about it, and you present what you understand and your experience and your reasoning, and I present my experience and my reasoning, and we talk about those. And suddenly something from your perspective enlightens my perspective and vice versa, and we both get closer to the truth. So um, that's not something we see demonstrated in most public arenas today, in most places in the world. But it was a very strong dynamic in Socrates' network in Athens and the various places where he taught in Athens. So um, that all of those kind of core things with Socrates were the foundation on which Plato built. And I'm going to get into him next, but I am going to pause just a moment. And that's a very, very quick, I know. I'm going to go a little longer in Plato um, because he wrote extensively, unlike Socrates. But just pausing for a moment, just those particular aspects. If somebody has a comment or question about Socrates, yeah, Anna, go ahead.
I missed one thing. You said he thought what was the root of all evil?
Ignorance.
Ignorance. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Which, by the way, even though there's no evidence he studied any Hindu teachings, the that's a core teaching in Hinduism as well, that ignorance is the cause of evil and the cause of problems in the world. Ignorance of the truth being called Sat or Satya in some. And um, Sat means truth or um, or pure being or the reality of life. And so ignorance of that, avidya, was the cause of all human suffering. And so the cure for all human suffering was to bring people into spiritual realization, which is a very Indian idea, very Eastern in general, but very specifically very Indian idea. It's in the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Gita and all of the ancient um, Hindu writings.
Thank you.
Hindus, by the way, do not call themselves Hindus. I mean, today they might, but Hinduism and Hindus is a westernized word again. The early followers called themselves Sanatan Dharma, which means eternal truth. That what they were studying was not a tradition. What they were studying was the eternal truth, Sanatan Dharma. So, all righty. Good question. Thanks. Anybody else on Socrates before we leap into Plato? I knew he was going to find a lump of Play-Doh for me, which we didn't get around to. And I was going to hold it up and say, tonight we're talking about Plato, because most people pronounce his name like with a D, Plato, but it's a T, Plato. And it was not actually his name. It was a nickname. His name was Aristocles. And Plato was a nickname because he was very broad-shouldered, very big chest, very built, very muscular guy. I know you probably don't think of him that way, but he was. And so he was called broad-shouldered or bear-like or muscular because of his build, his physical build. And that stuck. But his actual given name was Aristocles. Okay, so on to Plato. You can look this up, obviously, the writings, but he has so many written works. And if you study classical philosophy, you will positively study a number of these at a university level. Um, you won't have to remember all these, but I'm going to tell you pieces of them that I think are significant philosophically. Uh, One is called the Apology of Socrates, and it is a description of Socrates' final days on Earth. Um, he gets arrested, he's tried, he's convicted, he's sentenced to death, he is killed by the state, actually by the city-state of Athens, and it's administered by him drinking hemlock, which is a poison. And so the Apology of Socrates is his defense speech, basically, that he gave in defense of himself and his teachings and why he did not deserve to die, why he was not corrupting the youth, why he was not leading people away from the gods and goddesses of Athens, and so on. But he was doing inquiry into the nature of truth and moral inquiry into the nature of how to make ourselves and our society better. And so that's a really interesting one if you're interested in him, how he defended himself, and then how his death took place, which was basically with his wife and students present, his major students, including Plato. He ended up sending his wife away because he thought it was going to be too painful for her to watch. So she ended up leaving before he was killed. But his students did not. They stayed with him. And I won't go into it, but the very last thing on earth he's recorded as having saying was actually kind of a joke, kind of a play on words and a joke. So he had a sense of humor up until the end, and that's the one that describes his death process, kind of like reading about Jesus' crucifixion, for example. This is the end of his life, and that's in the Apology. He also has so many works. I'm not going to read you all his works. You can look them up if you want. But I want to talk about probably his most famous and probably most quoted, that is the real core of Western philosophy. And then I want to talk about a few central ideas from that, philosophical, as opposed to just what he wrote. There's so many things he wrote. Um, One of the things he wrote, by the way, which uh, is a book I just forgot the name of, but he wrote it anyway. He if you've ever heard the legend of Atlantis, the legend of Atlantis is not a New Age legend. It's also not an Egyptian legend. It became an Egyptian legend. It became a New Age legend. But the why we know about Atlantis as an idea of this great continent and great civilization that was destroyed and sunk beneath the sea in the area of the Atlantic Ocean toward the Mediterranean. Um, the reason we know about that is Plato. He wrote a book about it, and he did, while it is now considered allegorical, he in the book goes to pains to say it is not allegorical. It is historical, and it is stories that he's heard from mariners and from historians prior to him, and he's recording it before it's lost. And it does not fit much of what, if you're familiar with New Agey Atlantean ideas, it doesn't fit much of that. And he goes into quite a bit of description about how the it was laid out and how it was structured, which is all in concentric circles with waterways between all of them, what the rulership was like, and a number of things. So if you're interested in the origins of Atlantis, read that. And I should be able to remember, and maybe somebody does, which of his many books that's in. And I'm looking to see if I can find it at the moment, but I'm not finding it at the moment. Yeah, you can look that up. I'm sorry, I forgot. It's not one of his major works, but it became popular primarily because of that legend. And you can look up Plato's book on Atlantis, and it'll tell you the name and where to find it. I'm sorry, I didn't think to write that down. But the most famous of his works, I think, by far, is called The Republic. And he talks about many, many things in it. He talks about social justice, as I've talked about, social order. A great deal in The Republic. The idea is that there are many ideas. A central idea, which has certainly influenced the United States, is that the very best form of government ever, or best form possible, is a republic, which is what our founding fathers set up here. Now, whether we have that now is another story, but they set it up as a republic. And why the republic is the best form of government. It also includes the importance of education. Plato believed that education was essential to maintaining civilization, and particularly essential to maintaining a republic. He has said, as has Thomas Jefferson, by the way, who wrote extensively on this, that the Republic of the United States cannot hope to endure with an uneducated mass population. It can't endure. It has to be a highly educated population, and the more uneducated the larger percent of the population that becomes uneducated or poorly educated or miseducated, if you will, even uh, will destroy a republic. And Plato taught the same thing, essentially. The He also talked about what was is
Then
yeah,
you
yeah,
said Plato and who thought the same thing?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Jefferson writes all the founding fathers. If you ever do a study on them, um, all the founding fathers, the key ones we consider: Jefferson, Washington, Franklin, Madison. You know, all these different ones. Most of whom were involved in the Continental Congress, but uh, the early founders wrote extensively, and they had different ideas, but they wrote extensively about the importance of the republic and what it took for a republic to endure. And they tried to structure things around what they believed would help a republic to endure. Education was really critical in that. So were certain other things like term limits and a number of other things, and a balance of powers between executive, legislative, and judicial, and things you learn in civics class these days. If they have civics classes anymore, I don't know if they do. But uh, so two critical things I want to try to get to with Plato are the theory of forms and the allegory of the cave. So the theory of forms, and this is a dumbed down version uh, for time purposes, not because I'm dumbing it down, but uh, in essence, there the overall perspective is that the world we see, this three-dimensional time-space world that we see, and some of us, based on what we've studied together, this is real familiar. This is Platonic in origin. This is not East. Anyway, the material world is a time-space creation, and it is different than a spiritual world and different than a spiritual creation. They're not the same creations. The Bible has two different creation stories, Genesis 1 and 2. In certain parts of the East, primarily Punjab and India, there's the spiritual creation and the physical creation. In classical philosophy, there's the same differentiation between spirit and matter, kind of a deal. So to use more Greek and more Platonic oriented terms, there's what's called the phenomenal world, which is the three-dimensional time-space world of matter, matter being Greek, the word meaning mother, and that all things, all forms, here come the theory of forms, all forms are created in this time-space vortex and limited by that time-space vortex and are essentially empty shells or empty husks, similar to Kabbalah, for those who've studied that. And that then there's this other higher realm of life that was called the noumenal world. And the noumenal world was a world of idea, basically, a world of ideas and energies, not a world of forms and matter. And that this body is part of the phenomenal world. It's composed of matter. It had a beginning, a duration, it will have an end, it will be no more, it will dissolve back into nothing. But we are not this body. And this was not taught in the West prior to this era of Greek philosophers. This influenced all Western thinking after this. I think that's not an exaggeration. It certainly influenced Judaism and Christianity after this point, primarily Christianity. But the idea is that we have a soul that is not the body. It is connected while we're alive. It is not connected at death. The soul goes on and is immortal. The body is no longer connected and is mortal and dissolves and dies. But the soul is immortal. And life in some fashion goes on for it after the bodily death. So Plato got that from Socrates and popularized that, and it became a, a foundational teaching in the West. It is not so much a foundational teaching in the Mediterranean area, in the Semitic religions. There's a different understanding of soul and body in the ancient world, in the Semitic areas. But so that was his notion. And to go beyond that just a bit, that if something here was said to be good, or something here was said to be true, or something here was said to be beautiful, or something here was said to be justice. We use those kind of terms for things. According to Plato, there is no absolute truth here. There is no absolute beauty here. There's no absolute love here. There's no absolute peace here, because everything here is conditional, everything, and everything here is limited in its duration, everything. So there's no perfect justice in the world, no lasting peace in the world, no pure goodness in the world, no real truth in the world, only relative truth. And a lot of modern people kind of agree with that. But what many moderns don't agree with is, he said, however, there is a world beyond this, a noumenal world that is not bound by time and space. It is a world of idea and a world of eternity. And in this realm, there's pure goodness, pure love, absolute truth, pure being, pure beauty, all these different things we might think of as higher attributes or aspects even of God, or however we might think of them. And so Plato's kind of unique contribution besides promoting that idea, was that something can be said to be good here only to the degree which it embodies or displays absolute goodness. Something can be said to be beautiful here only to the degree that it expresses or embodies absolute beauty. Something can be said to be true here only to the extent that it embodies absolute truth. So um, that dichotomy, which in a lot of modern philosophy now, including modern Buddhist understanding, is dualism, essential dualism, that there's this light and dark, good and bad, life and death, higher and lower, and that there's these two completely different kind of realms, and it's a dualistic model of creation, which it is a dualistic model of creation. And that what we think of as virtue here is virtue only to the degree of which it embodies or expresses the pure essence of that particular virtue, the pure courage, pure truth, pure love, whatever it is. So if I embody a little bit of love in my life, um, but I limit it tremendously and I put lots of conditions on it, but there's a little bit of it there, then to that degree, I am touching into love. But to the degree that I'm really hampering it and limiting it and confining it, I'm only barely touching into it. If I would touch into it more and allow more of it to live through me, then I would be more loving. I would be more good. I would be more truthful. I would be more light. All those sorts of things. So that's a very key teaching of Plato that was continued on in Greek philosophy for quite some time. And the other one, which I want to mention before I pause for more comments, is called the Allegory of the Cave. These are all in the Republic. The Allegory of the Cave is worth reading. Just you can get this online free. Just get the Republic, look up Allegory of the Cave, read it. It's really interesting. Um, I will not do it justice in 3 minutes here, but here's the idea. There's a group of people who live their whole life in a cave, and um, they are chained in the cave, and they're chained facing a wall. There is an opening to the cave, but it's behind them. And they cannot get loose and they cannot get out. And what they see of life in this very dimly lit cave is because of sunlight coming in through the entry of the cave, which is behind them. So what they see of themselves and what they see happening in the cave, they're only seeing as projections of these shadows on the wall. That's what they're seeing. They think that's life. They think the shadows are real. They think this shadow, my shadow, they think that's me. Oh, that's me. That shadow is you. And this is real life, these shadows on the wall. That's life. And that's what they believe. But the reality, of course, is that that's not life. That's a shadow. And they're mistaking shadow for substance, another teaching of mystics in general. And that at some point, somebody actually gets out and they turn around and see the entrance to the cave and they leave the cave and they walk out into the real world where there's grass and trees and flowers and beautiful creatures and sunlight and warmth. And it's this love, it's like heavenly compared to where they've been living. It's like, wow, this is awesome. Um, and so they get acclimated to that, and they're so happy out there. They decide to come back and free the prisoners in the cave and tell them, no, you're trapped in a cave, and what you believe is real is just shadowy, substanceless nothing. Real life is out here. And so they try to convince them of that. And they take one of them and free them and bring them out into this great true life beyond the cave. And as soon as they walk into this brilliant sunlight, because it happens to be noonday, they're immediately blinded. They can't see anything because they've been living in darkness. And they're so blinded, they're frightened, and they want to go back into the cave. So probably you can already start seeing a lot of allegorical um, uh, descriptions of when people are presented with a truth higher than they've recognized to this point, that it sometimes frightens them, it sometimes makes them uncomfortable, sometimes they can't comprehend it, Sometimes they're more comfortable going back to their old limited beliefs or ways of looking at things. So that's inherent in the allegory. The idea that there is a true light and a true heavenly world or a higher world or a better world somewhere that we can experience that's much, much more real and substantive than this one is something a lot of us have either believed or have believed or heard taught in some fashion or other, um, or that we're trying to get to that higher world in our conscious awareness. And that this world, by comparison, is very, very heavy, very slow, very dark, very limited. So that allegory of the cave is a very, very famous teaching of Plato's that is used not only by Platonists and now Neoplatonists and others. It was used by the early church. It's used by other mystics from widely different traditions as a great kind of allegory or way of describing, these different aspects of reality and how we experience them. So the other thing I didn't mention, I guess, that I should mention, and then I'll stop, is that um, Plato started an academy. That's what he called it, the academy. And it was a place of studying truth, of doing investigations like Socrates did into what really is true, what's real, and having debates and discussions to try to get a higher and higher and deeper understanding of what reality actually is. And so he was famous for starting that academy, among other things. And another thing that both Socrates and Plato taught was that this republic that I've described as the kind of ideal government system, that it should be run not by politicians, it should be run by philosophers, and who are not vested in their power as a politician and who did not get wealthy from holding a position of office, that the position of office would be primarily not a position of authority, but a position of service, and that should be the attitude. Um, so um, that's another aspect of the teaching of these, and they're called philosopher kings. If you read about them now, that was a term that was coined, a philosopher king. So that's again kind of a different than we maybe tend to think of rulers these days. Um, so, all right, I'm going to quit there. There's lots more of Plato, but I hope that gives you kind of a sense of some of the things Plato and Socrates brought forward and became highly developed in the Western world. So I'm going to pause. Anybody comments or questions on any of the things I shared tonight so far? James, go ahead. Hi.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Degree in history. So,
Yeah,
um,
right. Yeah.
for me, it's all of these things that they were talking about, like philosophers and everything else, and the idea of democracy and everything. These are these are like the intellectuals discussing it.
Oh yeah. Oh
It's
yeah.
like poli sci professors and
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
were discussing it. So, the average Greek, you know, sacrificed a chicken to Zeus,
Right. Exactly.
and
Back.
but it wasn't these concepts. He farmed his land,
Oh yeah.
he fought in the phalanx with the hoplites, and had children and died.
That's
So
right.
that's part of it. One thing is what I talked about 2 weeks ago about when they were referring to God, who this God was.
Oh yes.
It's the Neoplatonism.
Yes. Yes.
So I kind of figured that out after I did some research, and it's interesting because you can find this stuff all the way up to Carl Jung of all
Oh
people.
yes. Oh yes.
So I was completely shocked about that, but there you go. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
what it
And
was.
the as you know, also the there's another thing we haven't talked about, a philosophy that became called Gnosticism, and
Mhm.
and the later Gnostics had the whole the demiurge idea and the
Mhm.
archon idea and these different things, which gets very involved and very very complex. But I think the point is really good that you made that then as now. I mean, we're sitting here. We probably don't consider ourselves the intellectual elite. Maybe we do, but we're sitting here now basically having these discussions, and the common American is not having these discussions.
Mhm.
I don't think the guy in the street is not pondering over was Socrates right or Aristotle right or Confucius right. They're going to work, they're putting themselves on the line, however they're doing it, and they have children and die, and that's pretty much their life. I don't think that's changed too much. The settings have changed a lot, but yeah, this is the there's kind of a I think a I think a sort of a trickle down effect historically. You have some great thinker come along, whoever they are in any given culture, and for the most part, they're not popular during their lifetime. For the most part,
Yeah.
sometimes they're reviled, sometimes they're persecuted or killed. But eventually, some of those higher ideas and ideals kind of filter down a little bit into the culture and make some improvements, I think, along the way. Um, and and then eventually those ideas become codified, and then you have this sect that thinks that, and this sect that thinks that, and then they start arguing, and then it becomes a source of friction again. And then
Mhm.
eventually another great teacher comes along, and they're kind of ridiculed or persecuted, and eventually those higher ideas kind of settle. I think there is kind of a settling down. At least I like to convince myself that there is some value to this, that makes things better,
Yeah.
in
Well,
a slow, long
yeah.
haul perspective.
Over the long haul, well, don't read history. But for me, uh, I would tend to agree, but I would also posit that there's an inverse and opposite reaction as well, where you
Yeah,
have people
yeah,
saying,
no argument. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can see it in American culture right now, the drift to complete materialism at the expense of everything else.
yeah,
And and we're looking for another reset. We always go
absolutely.
one way, then the other, and then we kind of go some way in the middle, then go back.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
there,
I agreed. I totally agree. Yeah, it's a um, one of the quotes attributed. I have two quotes for you, and we'll get to the other people here. The one is a quote from Aristotle, which I've often remembered, and if I get this right, um, any person who seeks the power of office is not fit to wield it. Love that quote. The We'll just stop with that one. We'll get to the other people, but I think that the all people who have been either spiritual teachers in some light or social reformers, sometimes they're a combination of the two. I think all of them, have held out hope that this would make a difference. And I think most of them have recognized that it's a slow difference at best. There haven't been, to my knowledge, and you would definitely know more about this than me. I don't know of any periods where there have been tremendous, huge cultural enlightenments quickly, that really took hold. So, yeah,
yeah, not really. And what happens is just kind of tends to get derailed. So,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
I yield my time.
yeah. Thank you, James. I appreciate your email, by the way. I'll catch up with you after. I'm doing some traveling here shortly to catch up with you, but long story, been tied up with things here, but I appreciate your writing. Thanks so much.
No problem, anytime.
Yep. I saw Nahama and Shuli first. Let's go to them and then we'll go back to Liz.
Hi, whoa,
Hey, yay.
it's me.
No, it's both of us.
Shuli's gonna turn on the bigger light. There we go.
Oh, that
Brighter.
helped. That helped a lot on this end. Thank you. Yeah.
Um,
I thought you were demonstrating the allegory of the cave there for a minute.
well, that's what I want to talk.
'Cause you guys
You
were
know?
yeah, that really helped. We can see you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you just gave me the perfect intro. Thank you. Because it's not a matter of getting outside the cave, it's a matter of opening up our thinking, our perception, our perspective, and letting go of all our definitions that keep us locked in the cave, so to
That's for,
speak,
that's for sure.
and just seeing from a broader perspective.
Yeah.
All of us are in caves,
Yeah.
and we can always widen our view.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I thought that's perfect. The minute you talked about the cave, and I went, uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
There's people tied to their cave. Yeah.
Yeah,
think we just,
I love that story too. I thought you would like that.
yeah. So she also had something
Yeah,
to
go
say.
ahead, Julie.
Okay. Two things. Allegory of the cave definitely rings a bell to me in one of my religion
Yeah,
classes.
yeah. Hmm.
So that wasn't surprising to hear. I mean, it was nice to hear again.
Right.
So yeah. Three things. Auntie needs her weather update, which you're both are gonna
She,
shudder at.
she's been
Uh,
waiting for that. Yeah.
yes, it's now 90 degrees. It's gonna be
Oh,
that all week.
oh,
And when we got in the car today after our, Sunday morning stuff, it ended up being 99 degrees
In the car
in the
wow.
car.
for being closed up.
Yes, from being, sitting in the sun and all of that. So, yeah.
So now you
Uh,
know what a brisket feels like.
ah, we know it all. Come on, it's been hotter here.
Yeah, I know, I know.
So the
Wow.
other thing is, this is actually both for you and for James, to see, do either of you or both know Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure movie?
I do. I think probably James does. James, how about you?
Oh,
He might be caught up in something else. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty
oh.
sure he does. He but yes,
Well,
I
it's
do
Monty
know.
Python, so I would
Uh-huh.
be highly disappointed if he didn't know. Because the premise for that one is, two of our main characters have to go and do a history report, and so they go back in time
In
on
time. Yep. Yep.
to
Yep.
find, and one of those people is, I'm pretty certain, either Plato or Aristotle, one of the two. I want to say Plato though.
I think it was I haven't seen it in a long time. I think it was Plato. I think it was, but I'm not sure
So
either.
when you talked about Plato, it made me think of that movie. And I haven't seen that movie in quite a long time. So yeah, go figure.
One thing I never understood until I studied a book with a friend who was a philosophy. He had a PhD in philosophy, so we thought, okay, maybe this will get me through this book. And it's called, what was it called? It was by a
Oh, you
philosopher.
just said
Why
it.
Can't We Be
We
Good?
good.
Oh, right,
And
right.
and was going through philosophy and stuff, and it just, the things he said, I'm going, and in Kabbalah it talks about this Jewish mysticism
Right.
and how they go together. And what
Yeah.
I realized, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I realized for me is that the early philosophers, we've made it into a head thing.
Uh-huh.
But the early philosophers were talking about their the world from their understanding of what it was cosmically or
Mm,
whatever.
hmm. Hmm.
What else to say it? It was, they were the early spiritual traditions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Philosophers were
Yeah.
presenting those ideas,
Yeah.
and I had not realized that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And the another thing that's an interesting study, I think, is to go back to some of the like in India, to go back to some of the earliest documents like the Vedas and things that we can find there. And there's no we don't know who wrote them. I mean, we really don't know anything about the authors at all. So
Right.
that's uh, I remember there was some show years ago. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Shirley would probably know it, but I can't remember it well enough. But it was a movie that had a little philosophical thing in at the end. It was really cute. And there was a guy in it all the way through who was quoting great philosophers like Plato and Socrates and all that. And this other guy who's kind of a down-to-earth, mundane, tough guy, and he's not interested in any of that. And and they both learn from each other. And at the end, this tough guy acknowledges that he's just finally realized he just needs to be who he is. And so he quotes Popeye and he says, I am what I am, and that's all that I am, Popeye, because the other guy's always quoting famous philosophers. And so he quotes Popeye back to him. And the guy says, well, truth is truth wherever you find it. So it's a cute little
Yeah.
scene. But anyway,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Oh, and
Shirley.
don't forget to watch third season of Good Omens, FYI.
Yes, I made myself a note. I'm not going to be able to do that for a little bit yet, but I have a note. So when we get back, I hope we can.
Okay, don't make me send you a text on that
All
one.
right.
Remind-
All right. Sounds
And
good.
safe travels.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. Liz, go ahead.
All right, you got it.
One of the reasons I'm speaking is sometimes you ask for a response and then like nobody says anything. And I'm like, this was so great. Somebody's got to say something.
Well,
And
thank you. Yeah.
something's been said. So what I'm saying isn't necessary, but I'm going to say it real fast anyway. I thank you for the allegory in the cave of the cave. I love, love, love.
Oh,
I
good.
love that. And that's been real helpful to me over years. And it was interesting when James was talking about how we're kind of coming to the pressures building for like a big shift on the planet. I
Yeah.
thought I heard him kind of saying.
Yeah.
I think all we have to do is take a collection, get enough money to make a golden statue of Stephen.
Yeah, that would
That should
that
do
would
it. That should
that
do
would
it.
solve things.
Let's solve a lot of problems.
If I could, yeah, that would do something. I don't know.
That would do something.
Yeah, I would go into
That's,
hiding, I'm sure, after that. But yes,
that's all I got.
that's funny. Thank you, Liz. Anna, where you're up. Go ahead.
I think you once said that it was the Sadducees that believed that there was no separate soul and body. That there was no separate soul.
Yes, specifically they believed there was nothing after death. Death was just the end.
The Adventist church where I came from believed basically the same thing, that when you died, your breath returned to God and you just returned to dust.
Hmm.
Are there any other religions that believe that, or is there any Jewish sect that still believes that Sadducean belief?
Yeah, yeah. The first of all, the reason that the Sadducees did not believe in any kind of afterlife is that in all five books of Torah, there is no afterlife mentioned. The first five books of the Bible don't mention afterlife at all. So, and well, those are the ones supposedly written by Moses, called the Torah. So, and the Sadducees did not accept the writings of the prophets. So all they had was the Torah, and there's no afterlife discussion in them. So they just said, well, that's, when you're dead, this is it. This is life, and then there's death. Um, I don't know. There are a number of um, Buddhist sects that not Gautama himself, but there are a number of Buddhist sects that teach that what we think of as soul is an illusion, that there is no self, there's no soul, that there is what they call an aggregate of consciousness based on what we've studied and read and what we've been told and what we've experienced in our life. And you put all those things together, what we've actually experienced, what we've been told or read, and all of that collectively forms what we think of as our consciousness. And when we're dead, that too dissolves, that it's just a dissolution. And so there are still groups that believe that. And then there are a lot of individuals in the world that think that. I mean, who aren't part of a faith traditionist. I mean, atheists, for example, think that.
Mhm.
That's a group I guess you could name. But there's just a lot of individuals who don't think of themselves as being anything. They don't think of themselves as being an atheist or think of themselves as being any particular tradition. But when you talk to them, they just think, well, you're alive until you're dead, and then when you're dead, there's nothing. You're just dead. So I know I've talked to many people who believe that, who are not associated with a group that teaches that. That's just what they've come to. They just think death is the end, and a lot of scientists, Carl Sagan famously, was an atheist and believed that when you're dead, you're dead. That's it. There's nothing else. He's a famous astronomer. I think you probably know that. But so yeah, lots of people believe that, and lots of people don't. And one of the challenges, of course, is that um, the people who actually know what happens after death are the people that are dead, and you know how are they? Nobody's come back and said this is what, and even Jesus, if you think he did come back, if you believe that he came back, he didn't tell us what, he didn't say anything about it afterwards. He didn't
Right.
talk about what it was like. So, so we don't, who knows? We all believe things, and now, interestingly enough, this is a topic for another time, but some of you are interested in science and some not at all. But in neurological brain research right now, there's some really interesting stuff being done on what they call non-local consciousness. And um, and there's a tremendous amount of research being done on near-death experiences and after-death experiences now that is way, 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 way beyond Professor Moody and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and those people from that era decades ago that you may be familiar with.
Yeah, I've read those.
Yeah, way beyond all that. And it's really interesting that, and also the CIA, by the way, has, you may or may not know this, but in the, I want to say, I want to say 70s. I'm probably wrong, but I think it was like 75 to 95-ish. They had a project called Stargate. It was top secret at the time, and now it's been exposed and it's out there. And they for decades trained spies in remote viewing, where they would train them how to have out-of-body experiences and go spy on enemy installations and top secret enemy facilities and things like that, and come back with very, very detailed and specific things. And Russia did that as well.
Yeah,
Um,
Monroe Institute did that when I
and the
was there.
Monroe Institute, yeah, Robert Monroe, yeah, of course,
They
yeah,
taught remote.
yeah, yeah. And there's tons of documentation on this stuff that's highly accurate remote viewings of things. Of course, the CIA and the KGB and all those folks were using it exclusively, militarily. But there's been a lot of scientific research on that stuff. The idea that people can have very specific conscious experiences while their body is not engaged in that process, while they're in deep sleep or while they're in suspended animation, because CIA has done that, while they're in death states, those kind of things where the body's, they're pretty much dissociated from the body. And and brain research up to the last few years has primarily posited that the brain is the creator of consciousness. And brain research now, some really leading figures in that are turning that around and positing that the brain is not, in fact, the creator of consciousness. The brain is an organ of consciousness, and that consciousness is non-local, meaning I don't have my consciousness and you have your consciousness. There is consciousness. There is this life force, this conscious awareness, essence, whatever we call it, and that it localizes at points of receptivity to it, to the degree that the capacitor can take in that consciousness. So you can have larger or smaller receptors to it, but that basically the human brain is a receptor of that and can channel it while the body's alive. But that when the body dies and the brain dies, there never was this my consciousness that dies with it. What I call my consciousness is the part of universal consciousness that I can kind of pull in and relate to and work with while I'm alive. So brain research is changing a lot and and coming more into line with certain philosophical ideas, like some of the Buddhist notions and some other things. But I find that kind of stuff interesting. Some people find it really eye-rollingly boring, but
That's amazing.
anyway,
the
Yeah.
brain and all, then the consciousness, really could go on studying that for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Thank
For
you.
sure. And they do, and as you know, they do things where they can electrically stimulate a particular spot in the brain and make a person feel an emotion
Mhm.
spontaneously, really strongly, as if they were having that emotional experience, but they're not. They're just sitting there in a lab somewhere, and suddenly they have this really strong emotional thing that they're triggering on purpose by triggering that particular center of the brain. Uh, there's also doing experiments with neural nets now and artificial neurons that are frankly scare the crap out of me. But there's a lot of research being done on consciousness right now and how it interfaces with the human organism. Some of that is really helpful, and some of it I think is really frightening.
Yeah, yeah.
But kind of like the AI stuff, helpful and terrifying at the same
Right,
time.
right.
Yeah. So, but I think back to James's thing. Oh gosh, I just looked at the time. Sorry. We'll wrap up. I think back to James's thing. We are at a threshold of something, of all kinds of major transformation in science and technology, and hopefully in human culture and consciousness also, and hopefully cataclysmically good changes and not cataclysmically disastrous changes. But we'll see. But we're on the edge of a lot of change, I think. So thank you all for being here tonight, for everybody who participated verbally and those who just participated energetically. I appreciate all of that. So let's just take a moment and ask for blessings on all of those who are here and on all of those who are struggling in any way in the world, that they be comforted and strengthened, and that in our own lives, peace and love begin to take priority, and that ultimately, in the life of the world around us, peace and love get a stronger foothold and begin to gain more dominion in our cultures. Thank you all for being part of our journey. We sure appreciate it. God bless. Good night.